So thank you all for being here. My name is Michael Myers. I'm the Executive Director of the Sierra State Parks Foundation. So we are the nonprofit partner for all of the Donner Lake, Tahoe, State Park, California State Parks. So what that means is we support education and interpretation programs and restoration and preservation projects. So this is obviously one of those education programs, and the most people I've ever seen in this room. One of the projects, restoration projects that we are raising funds for is the Donner Project. So if you don't know, phase 1 was restoring the monument. Phase 2 is doing the landscaping around the monument. So we are raising funds with Native Sons of the Golden West to create some reflective spaces around the monument, specifically for youth groups, education groups, to be able to have programs around the monument in addition to doing native plant vegetation and blocking off so we can protect the monument from visitors climbing on it. So it's a multi-phase project there. This is phase 2. So we're raising funds, so you can go onto our website. We have more information outside. Spread the word and let your friends know. Colaway TV is going to be here to do a new series on that as well. So that's one of the big restoration projects we have going on here at Donner Memorial State Park. So thank you all for being here, and I'm going to kick it off to Rafa.
Carlson. I'm in charge of adult services for the Trust Branch of the Nevada County Library System, and we partner and sponsor this entire speaker series. We're very proud to do so, to bring this type of event to our community, and it just warms my heart to see this great turnout. Thank you so much for being here.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bill. I'm one of the park interpreters here at Donner Memorial State Park. And what crazy weather. I was going to say springtime in the Sierras, but we're in summer already. Yeah, so our legacy days got cut short a little bit. Wait, that doesn't matter. I do want to acknowledge a couple of my fellow colleagues here. Nick Potter in the background, and our big boss is here, Jeremy Lynn. So remember to tell him how great Nick and I are doing, all right? So those of you that have been here before know that I'd like to start with something about our first stewards, our first custodians to this beautiful land, the Washishu. And the Washishu have a lovely story that involves a wolf. And I thought I would share that with you. And my apologies, I am going to read a little bit. I hate to do that. But, yeah. And if there's anybody from the tribe in here, my apologies up front for murdering some of the names, but I'm going to give it my best shot. So a long time ago, Nentushu, and that's the old lady creator, gave Tulisha an important task. Tulisha is the wolf. Nentushu asked him to fill the sky with stars and gave him a bag of stars. So Tulisha, off he went, and he is one by one, placing the stars in the sky ever so carefully. And as you might imagine, this became very tiresome. So eventually, Tulisha became tired, and he told Gilith, that's the coyote, that he would sleep for a while and finish the job that he was entrusted to by the old lady creator, and that Gwen should not open his sack or else. So then Tulisha placed the sack under his bed and fell asleep. You guys are way ahead of me, I can tell already. However, being Gwen, who is a bit of a vixen, a bit of a curious, mischievous kind of guy, he wanted to help Tulisha with this task. So after Tulisha fell asleep, he crept into Tulisha's room and stole the bag of stars. And as he went prancing out into the parks to distribute the stars, he tripped, and the stars just chaotically spread everywhere, forevermore illuminating the Washishi. So much as our stars illuminate us in the Washishi forever, our speaker tonight will be enlightening us about a beautiful animal, the wolf. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Axel Hunnicutt from the Department of Fish and Game.
Thank you so much for having me. Can you guys hear me like at this point?
No.
No.
Your microphone?
Aren't you
Okay. Great. So I am Axel Hunnicutt. I am the State Gray Wolf Coordinator for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Just a quick background on myself. I've been working with large carnivores and large mammals for about the last 15 years, primarily outside of this country, mostly in, I'll tell you, mostly in parts of Africa, but I've also worked with grizzly bears and wolves in Canada, and some other work in Alaska as well. So about a year and a half ago, I came to California to work with wolves, and having lived just down the road here, I ran into Bill, and he thought this could be a good future talk. And since we have spoken, the wolves have moved around quite a bit, so it's a pretty timely topic at the moment. So Bill kind of mentioned the stars, and that's kind of perfect because I want to bring us back in time. If we can just imagine 200 years ago being almost in this exact location. At a couple hours from now, we can imagine almost anywhere in the western U.S. or the western parts and most parts of this continent, 200 or so years ago, we would likely be able to hear the echoes of gray wolf howls across large portions of the continent. It's something that I am lucky enough to hear many nights. I've been camping the last 4 weeks or so with wolves and came down today. So it's very nice to be in a warm room. This crazy, I brought my summer sleeping bag. So anyways, so we can imagine the soft echoing howl of wolves streaming across the mountains here. I've howled a couple times on the lake here, and it does have a very nice resonance. I also howled this morning up in a new packed area and got replies of wolves. And so we no longer, or in certain parts of the western U.S., it is becoming more of a reality to be able to hear wolves again echoing through the mountains. Maybe I'll howl later, but I haven't. But we do quite a number of howls. But it's also something that is not unusual for our species to hear. In fact, as humans, we have evolved and existed alongside many large mammals, but none as prominently as the gray wolf. And so, 10,000 years ago and beyond, when we were cowering in caves, probably a lot longer than that, but pre-civilization, when we were in caves ourselves, we were fearful of many large carnivores that were on the landscape. That include bears, wolves, hyenas, lions. But the gray wolf was probably the one that we encountered most, because at one point, the gray wolf was the most prominently distributed large mammal on the planet prior to humans. We overtook them in that. And so when we left Africa, we would have encountered wolves at every northern latitude, from the high tundra in the Great Arctic, down into the deserts of Mexico and Saudi Arabia and Northern Africa, and into the jungles of parts of Southeast Asia and the Indian subcontinent. And so wolves were, at one time, everywhere. And we encountered them during our entire journey, branching out from, as we eventually conquered the world itself. And as a result, the wolf has embedded itself in our story. It is in our religion, it is in our culture, it is in the stories that we tell our children, it is in our nightmares, and it is in our dreams. There's probably no other species that evokes some sort of emotion in every human. And these days, it is extremely polarized. And in my work, I see both ends of that to an extreme degree, from death threats to love letters. I say that not jokingly. So, some of the oldest stories, in fact, Gilgamesh, the oldest written account, is a story of a wolf or a man that changes into a wolf to express his love. Stories of wolves in our religion, the Bible, the Quran, the wolf is always poised there. And even going back to werewolves, the reason that werewolves are really in our human story is that we were imposing the horrible things that humans were capable of doing, imposing them on wolves, saying that we had to turn into a wolf in order to rape, to murder, to pillage. And so the werewolf is grossly entrenched in that close relationship that we have with wolves. At the same time, there's a reason why we have that fear. Wolves were not only a competitor of ours, but we're also a predator of us. And that is something that is far less likely today. But in parts of Europe, across basically the 18th century and prior, rabies and other diseases were a lot more common in wolves. And humans were a lot more susceptible to being killed. And so there's even accounts of wolves in this particular story in France in the 1700s, of wolves killing upwards of over 100 people, mostly children. And that is where we get the stories of the Brothers Grimm, of them writing Little Red Riding Hood, the Big Bad Wolf, these stories that then became the childhood nightmares of future generations. And the wolf became the villain of most of our stories. I spent almost a decade working on hyenas, and we can give almost the same talk for some of the but wolves cover it largely. And so, how these stories came with us when we came to this continent as Europeans. I will not pretend to know the stories of the people that were here before, and I acknowledge that they have their own. But in terms of Europeans coming to the United States and North America, and particularly California, we brought those stories with us when we encountered wolves that were here. And there were quite a few wolves. There were lots of wolves. It was quite a great landscape. As we destroyed bison and other native game across the prairies, we artificially inflated the ability for wolves to propagate and expand. And at one point, there could have been 1 to 1.5 million wolves on the continent, artificially inflated by our need to destroy and remove the native animals that were here. And so, by and large, for the first several hundred years, yes, people eradicated wolves in the eastern parts of the United States to make way for cattle production. But at the same time, as Europeans were traveling west and traveling out here, they were encountering wolves, often jogging alongside their wagons as they came west. And they would encounter wolves, sometimes several dozen in a day, multiple packs, watching them feed. Settlers would talk about the dog-like features of them, how they would throw bones to them, how they would get them to come into camp. That is the sort of the love story of wolves. Once those animals were removed, it was a very different story as we replaced that landscape with cattle. And so that is where we then became in competition with them, since we removed large portions of their prey. And so this oil painting by John Gast really sums up this era really well and poignantly, in that the bison, the native peoples, and the gray wolf here in the bottom, it's not well presented here, the gray wolf in the bottom are the dark, shadowy, evil, savage things that Europeans needed to cast out of this land in order to bring the piano, the telegraph, and the library. This idea of progress, and this is actually called American progress, and it kind of sums up what was going on in this time. And also the idea of manifest destiny and acts like the Homestead Act, where it was getting people to go out west and cultivate land. Wolves needed to be removed, and so they were deemed one of the three evils, of the time. And so, yeah, it came to play that very soon wolves were deemed not only a public safety issue, but an issue of economics and the nation's ability to progress as an agrarian and agricultural society. And so the wolf needed to be removed in the eyes of our ancestors. And so eradication programs at a state, county, and federal level systematically removed the gray wolf from the lower 48 in a matter of 2 decades, effectively. Leaving just a small population in northeastern Minnesota and some straggling wolves, maybe in the Rockies and a couple in southern Texas. But by and large, the wolf was removed. And so the last wolf was removed in California around this time in 1924 in Lassen County. Again, spurred on by both the fears and realities of wolf livestock conflict and the fears that we brought with us as Europeans and what our ancestors not that far ago at that time had those real fears in their hearts and minds. And so yes, we had downies, we put out strychnine poison. The invention of strychnine poison allowed for the equivalent of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at the time to distribute millions of poison baits across the West to remove not just packs of wolves, but every single individual. The National Park System at one point was even putting sarcoptic mange into national parks to remove wolves as well. So we did this to the species, and so the wolf in California was removed, like I said, around that time, but also it has kind of a unique story in that we can't go back and look at the bounties like we can in Oregon and Washington and Montana, and that is because of the unique colonization, fast colonization that we had in our gold rush in California. We very quickly, going back to Spanish and Mexican governance in this state was probably when most of the wolves were removed, and we don't have direct accounts of that. But because wolves are a generalist that we know were from the high Arctic down into Mexico, we have multiple accounts that wolves were in the state and across the state, but we don't have great numbers and great figures of actually the specific areas that they were in and how many that there were. And so the wolf faded into history after 1924. These are wolves that are actually about 45 minutes north of here. Filmed a couple months ago. But this was a vision that would have been seen, in this area, not far ago, and just north in the Sierra Valley here, that would have probably been a prime area for wolves to occupy. And so that became but a memory for a long time. And again, that was the decision of our ancestors. At the time, the people at that time thought that was the right management decision for the needs of the people at the time. Fast forward a couple generations, and a new group of people, a new generation, decides that we want to protect endangered species, and we want to identify endangered species. And so with the Endangered Species Act being passed in 1973, wolves are declared one of the flagship species to be reintroduced and brought back. And that is targeted for Yellowstone National Park in central Idaho. And so 30 years ago, as of this January, 30 years ago, 15 and 31 wolves were brought down into the very famous Yellowstone reintroduction of wolves, and also into central Idaho. They were also going to bring them into Glacier National Park, but wolves were already coming south from Canada anyways. So this was something that was done by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the tribal entities in those areas, and the state entities as well. But wolves were already starting to make a comeback once those protections had been in place for several decades. So anyways, wolves spread fairly quickly. Wolves spread fairly quickly from those populations. And in 1998, the Mexican wolf was also reintroduced from captivity into areas of New Mexico and Arizona. And wolves had already spread into northeastern Oregon. A mere 6 or 7 years later from the introduction of wolves, have made a pretty solid foothold in northeastern Oregon. And they are primed for a wolf to move a very long distance. And a very famous wolf called OR7 does quite a magnificent journey in 2011 down into California. He's the first wolf on record because he had a radio collar on him. is the first wolf on record because of the collar to come back into California. He did not stay in the state, but he did found a pack called the Road Pack, which is right at the bottom there at the border, just north of Canada. Just north of California in Oregon. And the Road Pack is extremely important to wolves of today because that is where most of our wolves have stemmed from, quite a few of them. And so by 2015, California is poised to be recolonized by wolves because of this natural recolonization pattern that we see in a dispersal pattern. And so in 2015, the first official pack on record in contemporary times is found on the northern slopes of Mount Shasta. It's called the Shasta Pack. They're the first wolves known to be resident in the state since 1924. Fast forward 10 years, and the landscape has changed drastically quite a bit. Wolves now occupy large portions of northeastern California. We also have a reintroduction of wolves into Colorado. Wolves in California were not reintroduced, but they did come back naturally from this dispersal pattern you see from Yellowstone and Idaho. And so the wolves that are in California today are the great-great-grand wolves of the wolves that were reintroduced following the Endangered Species Act and the famous reintroduction into Idaho and Yellowstone. And we know that not just from the collars, but also from the genetics as well. We can track the genetics with the University of Idaho and several departments in Oregon. We can track the genetics of all the wolves and know where they've come from. In fact, one of the wolves just north of us here just came, or I don't know when he arrived, but he found out today from the lab that he's from Oregon. So a new wolf has popped up from Oregon. We do have, thanks to the collars, we know about quite a number of long-range dispersers. So when wolves disperse, so basically once they reach about a year or two in age, they'll leave their pack so they don't have to mate with the other wolves that they're related with. And they will go and travel as far as they need in order to find a mate. Wolves are largely monogamous, and they're looking for just one animal of the opposite sex that they can pair up with and form a pack, essentially for the rest of their lives. And so in the early days, these are all OR numbers because these are all wolves that were collared in Oregon and were slowly starting to make their way, make forays down into California to try and see are there other wolves. And a great example of this is a very famous case, OR93. OR93, back in 2022, he's this, I'm colorblind, so whatever color this is, he made quite a long trip down, and you can see he kind of followed, came through Truckee here, came along the canyon, basically where I-80 is, and then came through eastern Truckee, and then came down through the Desolation Wilderness, and then worked his way down through the Sierra on the north side of Yosemite, and eventually down to just north of San Luis Obispo. So they can travel hundreds of miles, if not thousands, in search of a mate. Once they find a mate, they will stay together as long as they have two things. As long as something doesn't kill them, and they have something to eat. And so this is the most recent map that we have today of wolves in California. There are 10 packs. The packs are these orange polygons. The red hatched areas, these are what we call areas of wolf activity. So these are areas where there are at least two wolves, but we haven't actually declared them as packs yet. So they haven't reproduced, or they haven't been stable enough for us to say, yeah, we think they're going to stay there. All these other areas are packs, packs that we feel are stable and have established themselves on the landscape. And then there is a pack down in the South Sierra as well. And quite interestingly, this is made up of a female from the Road Pack, who would have been up here in Klamath Falls. So she traveled probably using the Sierra as like a highway of areas of less or low human density, using the Sierras as a guideline, worked her way down the Sierra until she found a male who had come from the Lassen Pack, who was doing the same thing, weaving his way across the landscape, howling, looking for another wolf. Now she is quite an old wolf, and we collared a new female down there who came from our Bay Sail Pack, which is the pack that's closest to us. So a female that was born 2 years ago, wandered her way again, and my colleague down there was able to capture her and put a GPS collar on her 2 weeks ago. So, anyways, we still are seeing evidence of this movement down the Sierra. But by and large, the Lassen pack was the first pack that we had that was staged. The Shasta pack did not persist. The Lassen pack was the next pack, and they persisted. And so we basically are seeing wolf packs propagate around where the Lassen pack originally formed. And we basically will continue to see that movement. So this map took me about 5 minutes to make on GIS, but the data from it has literally taken thousands of staff hours, volunteer hours, citizen science hours, people being out there on the landscape trying to figure out what is going on. Because this really only encompasses about 50 to 70 individual animals. It is a pretty small population, but they use massive areas. As an example, the whaleback pack uses an area about 500 to 600 square miles in size during the winter. That's about half the size of the state of Rhode Island. So, oh yeah, and then I just wanted to note that we have lots of other new activity that's going on sort of outside of Quincy, between Chico and Quincy in this area as well. So that's sort of the area that we've been focusing on of potential new packs as well. So anyways, that map is something that we constantly keep updating. I feel like I update it every week sometimes because of all the new information, but it comes out of a lot of efforts, and primarily it starts with citizen science. It starts with literally anyone. Seeing a wolf, hearing a wolf, finding a wolf track. Sometimes, unfortunately, having a dead cow or livestock. That's often a way that we find new wolves, unfortunately, which I'll go into later. But yeah, so we use citizen science quite a bit. We also get a lot of, probably 90% of our reports online are from LA, San Diego, San Francisco, and so we have really strong evidence for there not being wolves in those areas. Because they tend to be misidentified coyotes or dogs, unfortunately. But I usually don't like to pop people's bubble when they write me a whole thing saying it was the most majestic animal, it changed their lives, and it was right behind the 7-Eleven in the dumpster. Try not to pop their bubble, but the point is that used to be the majority of the emails that we got and the phone calls that we got. Now, I feel like every month, more and more, it's more likely that the emails, phone calls, text messages that we get, it's more likely that it actually is a wolf. And so, if you're out recreating, if you're out working, whatever it is, if you're out and about, across large portions of the state, because of the numbers of wolves that we've had, wolves could essentially be almost anywhere. It's just, because there's only 2 or 3 of us that actually work on wolves, it's kind of hard to cover the 3rd largest state by area. So we do heavily rely on the public. This is just, thank you, Colorado, for letting us do this. But wolves are quite unique in just their facial features. I think we do also have a lot of detections up in this area, people saying that they saw wolves when they came up to Lake Tahoe. Those end up mostly being people that misidentified coyotes because they're not used to seeing coyotes with their winter coats. There are people that live in the valley or live in the warmer parts of California where coyote coats don't puff out as much. And perhaps their size is slightly different as well. So anyways, just some key, mostly note by the large ears. Wolves have that very round nose, round face, stout muzzle. The other thing is that if you see a black, large coyote, it's probably not a coyote. You would have seen in one of the other slides that the wolf up in the Arctic, you can get a lot of white wolves. At these latitudes, we only get black or gray. So we don't get white wolves in these areas. So yeah, public reporting is absolutely critical. We get a lot from hunters, people that are out running trail cameras, people that are out doing other surveys for other species as well. We're always looking for poop. We're always looking for tracks. We get a lot of people that send us tracks. If you are going to send us tracks or send us a photo, please don't use your hand in the photo. Hands vary in size. It's kind of hard to tell. Use a credit card or your phone or something else. But anyways, when I do this talk outside, usually I bring my dog who works with me, and he has a very large paw. And he's about the size, a little bit smaller than a wolf. But even his paw would sort of crimple in this, or be smaller in this. This is sort of an exaggerated track. This is a track that I lifted about a week ago up in the ash pan just north of Lassen Volcanic National Park. This is a better representation of one. This is from the Bayham Sail Pack. This is the breeding female of the Bayham Sail Pack, which is north of here. So I've just exaggerated her track a little bit just to incorporate the claws. You're welcome to come up and take a look at these. The one thing is when you see your dog's track, and you can see this next time, when I see tracks, just because I'm looking for them almost every day, wolf tracks tend to be almost more like diamond shaped, and dog tracks tend to be like more circular. You're going to just seeing things in shapes. But think about that if you do go out and about and see stuff, because we have had a lot of great reporting from this area. Because we used to have a small pack called the Antelope Pack last year that stemmed from Sierraville down to Truckee. And we would get detections at Independence Lake, Stampede Reservoir, areas not very far from here. Converse Flat, I've heard howling there. So these are all areas that potentially could have wolves. During this time, we don't think that that pack exists anymore. But the point is, this is an area that definitely could still have wolves in it or wolves traveling through it. And so we do greatly appreciate any reports that are sent in. This is from Highway 20, just near Spalding Lake, or Lake Spalding.
Wow.
This is kind of hard to tell, but pretty wolfy to me. So I'm going to put that down as a 75% in my book. The point is, we get people sending us stuff from all sorts of formats, and it is really helpful. But it's just the tip of the iceberg, because like I mentioned, the pack areas are huge. And so we will often start with that, just one data point, and now we have to search an area that could be up to, again, about the size of the state of Rhode Island, 1,000 square miles, to try to find it. So we will howl, we will look for tracks, we'll set up audio recorders, but probably the best thing we'll do is we set up lots of cameras. This is a wolf that was detected last August up near Verdi, near Beacon Point, just on the border with Nevada. So again, not far from here. There he is again. We actually think we know who he is based on genetics. But the other thing we'll do is we'll put up cameras, but then we'll also put a little bit of really stinky stuff. And just like your dog who loves to rub in his mess or someone else's mess, wolves do the exact same thing. So if we put a little bit of coyote gland or synthetic wolf urine, or if my dog pees on it, we'll set up a camera and a wolf will do this. Now this is fun, but it has a point. There's science behind this, because we will go back afterwards and be able to either pull hairs off that rock, or we can actually swab it and get the dandruff and eDNA off of it. We can pull eDNA out of tracks. We can pull DNA out of urine in the snow, in the soil. And so we rely very heavily on non-invasive monitoring techniques to actually monitor the state's population, just because it is exceedingly rare to actually see a wolf. But he had a good time. And from that, we can build out. We can build out these very large, related trees, or trees of relatedness, all based on genetics. And we know everyone's haplotypes. We know how related they are to one another. We know where they come from other states. And so this is largely showing the main packs, and then all these blue polygons. This is a litter. So these are all individual litters. We know that there have been about a minimum of 118 pups born in California since 2015. So to be able to say that we have a minimum count of actual pup numbers is fantastic in terms of actually monitoring the population. And going back, this is just relatedness amongst the current packs. And so you can see, because we're at the end of a long dispersal pattern, a lot of the wolves know each other, or related to one another. We have a couple packs that are half sibling breeders. We have a couple packs that are full sibling breeders. So there is some degree of inbreeding going on, but we still have, as I mentioned, new wolves coming from other states constantly that are constantly changing that dynamic. And then if we're lucky, and we pick just the right spot this time of year, we can also find denning behavior and home site behavior. And they'll do the same thing. Wolves, pups are actually better at actually howling or responding to howls because they get so excited. So you don't even have to be a good howler. You just kind of like make a fire truck noise and they'll usually pipe up. But yeah, when it comes to endangered species, reproduction is the name of the game. Reproduction and survival. And so we know that wolves are reproducing, and we know that they're surviving in California. And we know the population is continuing to increase. And so if we can find one of those areas and nail them down, this is the time of year, this is what we're doing right now, is trying to catch and collar wolves in packs that we don't have collars in. And so we do it with a variety of different techniques. Last night I was out with a thermal, Darwin scope, and my ghillie suit on at a cow carcass, trying to dart a wolf that was like, no, I'm quite warm over there. So that didn't work. But we try that sometimes. And then in the winter, we use helicopter captures as well. So this is from helicopter captures this last January. That's a wolf being brought in on a drag line. So it's in a satchel, it's all secure and everything, but it's in an area where they can't land because of the size of the trigger. That's up in Mount Shasta, that's the whaleback pack. So that's a wolf being brought in for processing. Then our biologists, myself, our veterinarians, we do a full lockup, we take blood, we take samples, we look for disease monitoring and whatnot, and most importantly is we get the GPS collar on. And then we release them. So, excuse the muddy that are there, and then that's how we figure out how many there are, and then that's how we find the next pack, and then that's how it continues. And so that's how we monitor the population as best we can. It's extremely intensive from the resource side, but it is extremely important that we get population metrics and be able to report on where the endangered species is it still endangered? And that's something where we're at right now, where we have met the threshold of going into what we call phase 2 of wolf conservation in the state. We have a minimum number of breeding pairs. Breeding pairs are kind of different from packs. It's a male and a female that survive till the end of the year with their pups. And so we continue to have the population rise. Last year we had a minimum count of 50 wolves. It's kind of, people always want to know how many. That can be kind of hard because the population is booming right now. If all the packs had pups this year, there's another 60 wolves on the landscape. But most of them will not live. And so by the end of the year, that number will be significantly lower. And so you can see in 23, we had 48 pups, but the year-end count was only 43. And last year we had we had 24 pups. Last year we had 33 pups in total, but the year-end count was only 50. And so we're constantly on this boom-bust cycle, but the overall trajectory is that the wolf population in California is increasing, and it's increasing rapidly. I'm going to skip over a little bit of this. One thing that is important about the collars is to be able to inform the public. And the reason is that wolves have returned to California. When the California wolves have returned to in 2015, 2025 is extremely different from the California that they left in 2015. There were only about 1 million people in California at that time, or 1.5 million. There wasn't a lot of livestock. Today, we're the most populous state in the nation. Almost 40 million people in the state. It's a highly transformed landscape. We don't have massive parks like Yellowstone. We do have lots of public land, but most of the areas north of here, it's a mixed-use landscape. And most of the areas in which the wolves have decided to colonize on the east side of the northern half of the state is largely agricultural. And so there is not a wolf pack in California that does not overlap with cattle and does not consume cattle. And so that's where the crux of the polarization, the politics, and the management around wolves is so stifling, is that wolves at times can kill an exorbitant amount of livestock. There's a pack in Siskiyou County that has killed over 100 cows at a minimum. There's a couple things to this. One is that our densities of native prey are much lower in California. We have a different landscape. We have a changing landscape as well. Fire, climate change, land use practices, public land changes. I mean, there's a lot of different factors that play into it. Wolf collars these days are not just to inform science and management, but they're also to inform livestock producers to be able to help them be able to mitigate conflict and inform them of where the packs are. And so the majority of our work is actually working with livestock producers across parts of California, because the conflict around wolves is immense. One of the things that we recently came out with, and anyone can go, you can actually do it on your phone right now, is you can go to our website. We have a location map where you can actually see the rough and approximate locations of all the collared wolves in the state. There's large portions of it that are buffered out right now because of the den sites, so you won't be able to see all the wolves all the time. But going into the rest of the year, this tool is largely to inform livestock producers to be able to tell them where the packs are. And so this is good news to a lot of people, bad news to others. From a conservation point of view, it's a huge success, right? The Endangered Species Act brought back a species that was once extinct. It's thriving. It's thriving across the West, not just in California. And in California, we're seeing the state and federal protections allow wolves to rebound rapidly, successfully, and quite broadly across the state. It's just a matter of time before we have wolves all the way to the coast, and perhaps in more odd places like the southern coastal ranges outside of LA. We have wolves down in the Tehachapies right now. So we're pretty close to having wolves basically try to come down into the LA area. But it all is a matter of perspective and where you sit. For people that are concerned about our elk populations or other game populations, whether that's because you're a hunter, a sustainable use person, a naturalist, just a biologist, or a casual person that cares about these things, wolves will have an impact on that. There are less elk in the state of California than there are in some individual herds in the state of Idaho. And so wolf populations in California can have devastating effects on them, potentially. We also know that our deer and pronghorn numbers continue to fall in certain areas, and so wolves could also have an impact on that. At the same time, they are the native prey of wolves. Wolves could change the landscapes in some areas. Just over here in Sierra Valley, it's probably just a matter of time before someone's running a wolf watching program, bringing tourists up there to drive around. That could either be an invasion of privacy for the people that live up there, or it could be an economic door to a new pathway to live. It changes, there's a lot of people talk about wolves change rivers. That has largely been debunked and proven not to be true. But regardless, wolves will change how large carnivores like mountain lions, bears, also coyotes, how they use the landscapes. For the return of an apex predator will have consequences, positive and negative. It's all a matter of perspective. And it will also have consequences to the landscapes that we live in. Again, California being such an urban and developed area, we are likely to have wolves coming close to urban areas. And Truckee is probably going to be the one that's probably going to be the first to have wolves potentially. I'm not going to say that this pack is going to establish itself here, but people that recreate just outside of town are likely to have, could be interfacing with wolves. I'm not saying it in a negative way, but sharing the same space. Which also brings up recreating. A lot of people live up here because they want to recreate. They want to recreate with their dog as well. And so it's most likely that where we are going to see human-wolf conflict is with human-dog conflict. People that are used to taking their dogs out off leash, that is probably the number one way for a wolf to come into conflict is with you, is if you have your dog off leash. They see your dog, depending on the time of year, either as a potential lover or as a threat. And if it's a threat, it is going to try to kill it. And you are probably going to want to save your dog. I know I will want to do the same. And so there have been a number of, I think 9 counties in total already have declared states of emergency around public safety with wolves in California. That largely stems from the livestock conflict. But at the same time, there is this interplay between Californians living in areas where wolves are, recreating in areas where wolves are. Now, by and large, wolves are probably the species that we have to worry about the least as humans, just by numbers. If you look at mountain lion numbers, mountain lion attack numbers, black bear attack numbers, wolves, there's only ever been 2. Not in California, not in the US, but in North America in the last 200 years, on record. Compare that to just the number of black bear attacks that occur every year in the United States. And so it is exceedingly rare, but it is something that is going to bring change. Obviously, to livestock producers, it is drastically changing how they run their operations. They have to employ a lot of new services. We have done several compensation programs where we compensate for the loss of livestock, we compensate for the indirect losses that wolves have on livestock, pregnancy rate decline, overall weight decline in livestock just by the presence of wolves and the stress that they bring. It also changes how they run their operations, when they calve. I mean, imagine having to change your business model when running on such slim margins. And so it brings a lot of questions to mind. What does this mean for my future? Not just for this rancher, but for other people as well. And so overall, the consensus is that wolves bring change. And it's because wolves overall represent a time in our past, a time that was simpler, a time that was more wild, a time where we could just say, yeah, let's just remove that entire species and let's poison it and eradicate it. That is not an option today, and I don't think that it is the belief of the majority of the people in the United States. At the same time, as a microcosm for that in California, most Californians will never have to deal or encounter a wolf. Now you can see that as a positive or negative. When I talk to livestock communities, they see that as the majority of the people in the state will never have to see the change that this species has brought. And even with just less than 100 individual animals, it has brought significant change. Our initial pilot compensation program is $3 million. We burned through those funds in less than 18 months. It's likely that wolves are probably having a very large economic bill or impact to Californians, or at least in livestock communities, to the tune of some astronomical number. It's up to us if we want to decide as a people, as a state, how we manage wolves. Do we think that wolves have a place in society today? Do they have a place in our state today? And if they do, then how are we going to work with the people that are actually going to bear the consequences of having a species return? I say this because, again, almost all the wolves in the state are in areas of conflict with livestock. And so, yes, it is going to bring, I was going to supposed to get through all this, but yeah, we've seen just numbers continue to decline every year, just the number of livestock kills and investigations. And so it requires working with producers. A lot of what we do is working with communities, talking with them, trying to share information, trying to share and prepare for the change that is to come. We don't, and we often do not win these battles. Sometimes we do, in the sense that sometimes producers get on board with actually helping us monitor, and that is from the whaleback pack, that's from a rancher who actually has taken a bit of a fascination to the pack and sends us a lot of information. But that's a bit of a rarity, and that's going to take time. That's going to take quite a bit of time to adjust that change. I'm going to skip over some of this stuff just for the sake of time. And so, yes, it begs just to leave everyone with the question of, again, the initial fears that I brought up in the beginning, the stories that we have with wolves, have returned to us here today. For the people of this area, it might be more about recreating, and it might be more of a fascination, or just the novelty of having wolves nearby. To your communities just 40 minutes up the road, it could be severe economic costs as well. Regardless, wolves bring change, and they bring an element and a time of wildness that I've seen in other countries in Africa, and it's the same story, whether you're dealing with nomadic herders in Central Africa, ranchers in California, it is the same thing. Working with livestock, working with wolves, working with large carnivores, finding some sort of, I don't want to say coexistence, but cohabitation in some way requires compromise, because no one likes change, and none of us, that's one thing humans are not good at, is adapting to change. But during these polarizing times, I'd like to think that maybe the wolf brings a little bit of fascination and inspiration to all of us in some way, and that perhaps working in natural resources, I mean, just personally myself, having worked in natural resources, particularly wildlife management across 10 or 12 countries now, we're all the same. We're all humans. We all have certain desires. And certain desires and needs, and we often share them with these species. They have the same thing. They're trying to establish their families and make their families grow and be safe. And so, at a bare minimum, what I have found has been most helpful in my work is my ability to just be human and see that in other people. Even if we have greatly differing views about wolves or about anything else, I try to view people at a bare minimum as just what is the common ground. I can see each other. We can see each other as humans on this earth, and whether we disagree about this species or any other, at least we can start there. Because if we start with wolves and the polarizing conversations they bring, that's not going to go anywhere. And that probably boils over in the politics of today. So, I will leave you with that, and be happy to answer any questions you guys have about this.
I have one. Yeah. Just driving over here, we had 2 coyotes cross Highway 89 as we were driving over. So it brings up the question, what is the relationship going to be with wolves coming in with our current coyote population?
Yeah, that's a great question, because coyote numbers across the U.S. are largely artificially inflated because of the lack of wolves. Wolves will, in general, should decrease coyote numbers over time, where they persist. We will see the same thing with mountain lions as well. Mountain lions are occupying areas in California that they naturally would not have when wolves were present. And so that has been seen in other states like Wyoming and Idaho, is over the course of many years, once wolves are persistent in that area, mountain lion numbers can fall by a factor of 10. Coyote numbers, that can also decrease dramatically. It they're direct competitors. With coyotes, wolves will actually kill them, but then once they get to lower numbers, it's just a competition thing. With mountain lions, it's that they're competing for the same resources, and so eventually those mountain lions will move to different areas, and then the density will expected to just gradually lower. Sorry, you had your happening.
Thank you. I have a question from my granddaughter, actually. She wants to know how far an individual wolf has gone from birth to where they settle. Like that maroon one.
Oh, yeah. We were just talking about this the other day, like the Western wolf coordinators. Someone had like almost 1,900 miles. Yeah. And that's just the ones with collars, which is a small representation of the population, so there's probably others that have traveled further. Yeah.
My question is about the collar. Do those have a lifespan? Do you have to replace those? Do they lose them very often?
Yeah, these, the collars last, it all depends on the pings, how often you will have them set. We have them set to 3 points at night, 1 point during the day, and then it tries to upload the data once in the morning, and that will last about 2 years, 2.5 years. Yeah, so if we just put a VHF on there, they can last about 7 years, almost the span of the animal, but then you have to do some aerial telemetry to find it. So it takes some of these.
Which, I'm sorry, I didn't catch this during the presentation, which wolf pack is active in Sierra Valley right now?
The Bayham Sail Pack is active across most of the valley itself. And so their home range is, that's a different presentation. I'm getting it after. So yeah, the Bayham Sail Pack covers basically the entire extent of all the public land in the valley, sorry, all the private land and then all the surrounding public land around it. And then there's the Diamond Pack to the northeast up in Frenchman Lake.
And another, if I may, another question?
Yeah.
What has been learned from farmers, ranchers who have lived with this for a longer period of time near Yellowstone and Idaho, Oregon?
Yeah, no, I mean, there are some ranchers that have obviously been living with wolves for 30 years now in those areas. And one thing is carcass removal, actually like how they process and move carcasses around, removing scents from the landscape, the need for human presence, and probably the other thing is calving time. And that's one thing that we're seeing in certain areas is people calve. Prior to having wolves on the landscape, mountain lions and bears generally do not take cattle. Sometimes they do, but far more rare than wolves do. And so most livestock producers in California have not had to think around wolves. And so for instance, up in Sierra Valley, there's a lot of people that calve at varying times of the year. During August and September, that is when the pups are going to start to move. They're going to be with the pack, and there are fewer fawns, fewer deer and elk fawns in the landscape. They're also big enough. And so that is the time, that is the worst time to calve. And yet there are still a lot of people in California that calve their livestock during that time. And that's one thing, is just like some of those changes. But there are lots of, there have been lots of programs of bringing producers, ranchers from those areas down to kind of say, hey, this is what we've learned over 30 years. Yeah.
Without going into much detail, we were talking about how the wolves and that, and you know much about these things, but like see stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they definitely, they had eradication programs as well, but just not nearly to the extent that we had. And obviously because most of Canada's population and agriculture is close to the border of the United States, that's primarily where it happened. And so most of Canada's wolf populations, obviously northern Alberta, northern BC, were doing extremely well. I won't get into the politics of what's going on in BC right now, because there are some drastic, or not drastic, but there are some different management things that are going on in terms of removing wolves in order to try to get caribou numbers to come up. Yeah. Which is not too dissimilar from what we do in Alaska, what has been done in Alaska, where wolves are a lower subject.
Me?
Yeah.
So I wonder what kind of interaction and response you're having from the ranchers in Sierra Valley, and is there going to be a reimbursement program there?
Yeah, so there is actively a reimbursement program or a compensation program for any confirmed or direct loss of livestock. We do compensate for the fair market value of it. At the same time, it can be exceedingly hard to find the carcasses. We try to use the collars to help with that, but there's probably an unknown number, there's a certain percentage or factor of animals that are killed that we don't know about. Especially in areas where a lot of the public lands in California, particularly the Forest Service and BLM, are public grazing allotments. Those are areas where tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of cattle are put out every year, and then are brought back at the end of the season. If there are wolf packs in those areas, the losses can be relatively high, and there's no way to actually say, hey, it was because of wolves. And so compensation for that is not available at this time.
Are you having a lot of communication with them, and are they entitled to reimbursement on public lands?
Yeah, if they can find, it doesn't matter where it is. If a livestock has been killed by a cow, the state will reimburse for it. But at the same time, we were only allocated $600,000 last year, and we've already used about half of that. So.
How are the ranchers reacting to the wolves in general there?
It's extremely emotional.
Yeah.
I would say that, in all seriousness, it is not fun to go to a meeting up there. And it is because the emotions and the reality is extremely real. And so yeah, it's a difficult situation. I will say that right now we do have a program that just started last week where we have a strike team out. So basically biologists and wildlife officers that are on private lands helping to deter wolves from private ranches.
Nice.
So that's active as of this last week. Yes, sir.
What are the major causes of mortality of pups? Seems rather high.
Yeah, we don't have that information specific to California, but part of it is once the pack starts. Well, I guess there's a couple things. When the wolves are born, they're born into a small den, and it's a secluded area. The one I went to yesterday was just a hollowed out, fallen tree, and so they're secure in there. There's obviously a degree of mortality just from childbirth, sometimes just from the initial rearing. There are animals that are born, there's just a degree of mortality that occurs around birth, of course. After that, they're brought to what's called a rendezvous site. So they're big enough to move around and jump around and be cute, but not big enough to actually go on hunts. And so they'll find a big open meadow, usually a wet meadow, and they'll drop the pups in there. And the pups will just sit there and kind of play around and be goofy, while the parents and the older animals go and hunt and then bring food back. So during that time, they're generally protected by high grass, but there is a degree of mortality that occurs there from other species like mountain lions. Other wolves are a great case for that as well. We don't really see that in California right now because most of the packs are relatively related, like you saw from that tree. And so by and large, we haven't seen a lot of intra-specific mortality. But once the packs become less related, we expect that will greatly increase. So yeah, we actually, in California, we have seen relatively high survival for pups, but it's generally during that time. And then when they start moving with the adults and moving around, during hunts and whatnot, when they get kicked, those are generally the times that they die. The other thing is in California, the highest thing we've seen, known mortality, is vehicle strikes. So collisions, it tends to be the younger animals that are less savvy to it. Yes, sir.
How can a layperson tell the difference between a coyote and a wolf?
Yeah.
Their stature, how can
Yeah. So I'm trying to see how big this dog is here. So I put you on the spot.
70 pounds.
70 pounds. Yeah. So this dog's about 70 pounds. A female wolf will be about 70 pounds. And so it's not that large of an animal. Some people say, it's the biggest dog I ever saw. It's 150 pounds. And that's typically not what we find for wolves. So the adult male that we caught just north of here was 116. But in general, it's their stature. They tend to be quite tall in their haunches, very long legs. The other thing is the size of the foot. Like just in the photos, if I can't see the head or anything, if I could see the size of the paw being like that big, relative to a skinny foot, that's a really telltale for me. And then the other thing is the pointy ears and the pointy snout is also the real telltale for coyotes. For coyotes having that narrowness. So.
Axel, I'm going to make myself unpopular and say, how to use 2 or 3 more questions.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit late.
Sure. I'll go with this side.
If we run into a wolf with our dog, the dog has a good recall, let's say, is back on leash, what is the best action? Like we're all used to running into black bears.
Yes,
And we even heard about what to do with mountain lions, but not necessarily what do we do?
It is generally the same. Typically, you shouldn't expect the potential behaviors that you could see with mountain lions and sometimes bears. Wolves tend to stay away from people and be afraid of us to a certain degree. However, if a wolf has been habituated, it could try to come close to you. And there is always the possibility that for whatever reason the wolf is aggressive. If it is aggressive and it's coming towards you, obviously fight back, make yourself big, don't run. A lot of the same things that we talked about with mountain lions. Use sticks, stones to fight back. If you just have an encounter with a wolf and it's a couple hundred yards from you, again, try to get your dog on a leash, make yourself known to it, don't run, and just try to walk away from the area. Most of the time, it's going to be running away. But yeah, speak to it, make yourself known. And then, of course, even though wolves are protected on a state and federal level, that is the one time that it is, you know, if for the sake of public safety, human lives are paramount, and so it is legal to kill a wolf if it's in defense of human life, but not for property. Yeah.
Does bear spray work on wolves and coyotes and mountain lions?
Yeah. And elephants. But in all seriousness, yeah, bear spray, pepper spray, especially any animal that uses its olfactory senses, that's going to hit them hard. Yeah. But we, again, the number of accounts, there are like maybe a couple dozen accounts of more aggressive wolves across the U.S. in the last couple decades, and it's usually attributed to some sort of, someone's been feeding that animal, it's been on a carcass or something. And so, again, the primary thing is prevention, just like with every species, is take care of your trash, take care of attractants, and all that. Last one first. Yeah.
Is there evidence of wolves between the Venezuela pack and the Yalomani pack?
Yeah, that's a good question. Last year, we did have, there was a bunch of media storm about Hope Valley. We never found anything there. That was probably the only indication that there was something. There was a Bakersfield female that went to immigrant camp about 3 months ago and came back. But other than that, we have not detected anything between here. And that's probably a testament to why the pack is so far south. A lot of people say, well, it could be because there's wolves all across it. And then they establish themselves there. But it's probably because those two wolves wandered across the Sierra, finding absolutely no wolves. The other thing is that it's just not great habitat. It's not, the high Sierra really don't have the prey densities of native prey, nor is there the livestock there to supplement it if not. So yeah, the Yalungi pack is the only thing between here and Venezuela we've detected.
And then also the hatcheries, you said?
Yeah, and then down here we've had it's just like 1 or 2 animals that we've detected. That's like as it is snoring and stuff.
And I'm going to interrupt there. Ladies and gentlemen, one more time, let's think very